Welcome to the very last session in climate change. My name's David Karoly, and I gave the introductory part, if you like, the welcome to this course and a brief overview of climate change, science, impacts, vulnerabilities and responses. And that's what you've been learning about for the last 9 or 10 weeks. And it's my pleasure, if you like, to now present a brief overview of this whole course. And as you know, for the last 10 weeks or so, we've been covering a wide range of material: climate change science, the impacts of climate change around the world, what we can do, vulnerabilities to climate change, adapting to climate change and its impacts, as well as trying to slow down climate change. And one of the other things that's been discussed, and has actually been a feature of some of the discussion fora as part of this course, has been the range of opinion. The different perspectives from different parts of the community about whether climate change is actually happening or whether it's in fact a conspiracy amongst climate change scientists like myself. And I hope that you've all now been able to reach conclusions about whether the evidence for climate change is strong based on the science or whether it's in fact a conspiracy amongst scientists. But it's up to you, the participants in this course, to make your decisions about that. So, really this course is just the beginning of understanding about climate change and its impacts and what to do about it. It's the end of this course, or the end of this series of presentations, is just the end of the beginning. What is up to you as members of the global society is to think about how you want to respond, how you can learn more about climate change. And it's important to set climate change in the context of many other global issues. We live on this blue marble, as NASA has described it. We live on a planet for which water, land, biodiversity, ecosystems and human society are closely interrelated. Climate change is not the only issue affecting our planet and our society. There are many different issues, like water resources, like food supply, like energy, like housing, like natural disasters, human health, environmental sustainability and biodiversity, population growth. Many of those issues have occurred for different reasons than climate change, but climate change compounds the impacts of many of those issues. And when we look at this image, we see that the atmosphere is just a very, very thin layer surrounding our planet. But the critical aspect of this subject is that the atmosphere has been used as a dumping ground for the waste associated with our major energy source since the Industrial Revolution. We have been dumping carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere without much regard for how they would impact on the global climate. This month, September, and next month, October, mark some very, very important aspects of, if you like, international activity on climate change. The end of September marks the release of the 5th assessment report, the first volume of it, of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it will provide an update on climate change science, on the physical basis for climate change. That update comes out on the 27th of September. By the time you are listening to this presentation, it will be available on the IPCC website. In addition, later on this year, in November, there will be another meeting of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Conference of Parties, and they will be discussing again what needs to be done in terms of preventing dangerous climate change, what needs to be done in terms of reducing greenhouse gases to avoid dangerous climate change. And in the lead up to these important, if you like, reports and meetings, a number of groups have been raising attention, raising awareness about climate change. There has in fact been a flurry of climate change denial information on media outlets, on websites. There is in fact a report called the Non-Governmental Assessment Report on Climate Change, the NIPCC report, which is primarily based on websites and not peer-reviewed publications, whereas the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report is based on peer-reviewed scientific articles. It's important to understand that many groups are raising concern about climate change. And one of the most recent groups is an organisation called the Earth League, made up of 12 leading climate scientists from around the world who've raised attention again about the importance of addressing climate change. They've issued, in fact, a very stark statement that the body of evidence indicating that climate change is already affecting human society and the planet, that evidence is overwhelming. There is already no reasonable doubt that human activity is changing the climate system. And what's critically important is that we have much greater changes in store in the future. Scientists have been warning about the possible impacts of climate change associated with releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels for more than 110 years. As the statement from these 12 leading scientists said, nations go to war to address much fainter threats. There have been many risks that have been led to coordinated global action, and so far the action to address the threat posed by climate change has not been sufficient. But we do know that technological advances, particularly associated with generating energy with no associated or minimal associated increases in greenhouse gases, no emissions of greenhouse gases, that is now becoming possible and becoming more common all around the world. There are a number of other groups, including groups like the Climate Commission, which has just been disbanded by the new Australian government, elected early in September, that have also raised, if you like, awareness and key messages on responding to climate change, including that we're already seeing the impacts of climate change, the consequences of our changing climate in many different areas, in the social, economic and environmental impacts all around the world. But there has in fact been major progress in responding to climate change, to address reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. But a lot more needs to be done, and a lot more needs to be done very quickly. And the really important message, based on the science and the long lifetimes of carbon dioxide when it's emitted into the atmosphere, is that most of the available fossil fuel reserves that have been identified around the world cannot be burnt if we want to stabilise climate this century and avoid dangerous climate change. And decisions about the sort of climate that we want to experience, that we want our children to experience, need to be made this decade. This is the critical decade in terms of responding to climate change. We have choices that we can make. As I said in my very first presentation, we have a choice between a world that warms at 5 degrees or more above pre-industrial temperatures within this century, or a world in which greenhouse gas concentrations stabilise and warming is limited to only 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Even in that world with less warming, we will still see a number of adverse consequences. We have to choose whether we want to live in a world which is unbearably hot for many ecosystems. We have to choose between a world that the planet has not seen for 50 million years, or a world which is still substantially hotter than the present. And the choices we make will affect whether we can actually manage climate change, whether we avoid the unmanageable consequences, or whether we just push on ahead with business as usual. Those choices will be made by all of us. They will be made by all of human society. But it's only now, with the information that you have received in this subject, that you can think more about the decisions that you make and communicate this information. But this course is only the start of your journey and society's journey in decisions about whether it wants to address climate change and what you want to do. All actions by individuals, by communities, and by governments and countries all around the world will affect our global climate. Please use the information from this course wisely and treat this as just the end of the beginning of your journey in terms of addressing climate change. Thank you.